Okay, thank you, Doug. Thank you, Sarah. This is Bob Simmons. We're really pleased to be able to do this presentation today. Um, and I wanted to first start with a identification of what the Walnut Creek Watershed is. It is 150 square miles in size. It includes 9 cities and towns and a lot of unincorporated property that is regulated by the county. On the lower right-hand side, you can't see it, is Mount Diablo, if that gives you some context of where it is. It took us about 4 or 5 years just to get organized. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Also wanted to show people that may not be familiar what Arundo looks like. It is, as Doug was saying, a plant that grows 20, 25 feet tall. It is usually found in riparian areas. We've seen some in sort of some upland areas that are close to water, but still above the high bank. Why try to remove Arundo besides it's fast growing and grows up to 20 to 30 feet tall? It uses a lot of water. It eliminates native plants and wildlife habitat. We've looked hard when we've taken it out. We haven't found any animals or even any nests in it that would indicate that birds are using it. Sometimes in the past it was thought it might actually help with regard to flood control or erosion control, but it's now been considered to be, it is considered to be a flood risk. It's also a fire risk because as it grows, it renews itself every year, but then leaves the dead stock from the prior year. And particularly when you find it close to homes, it presents a serious fire risk to those properties. And we did a brochure that I will talk about later, where one of the slides or photos on that is of a picture that came out of a screenshot out of a fire in San Diego, and you can actually see the leaves of the Arundo in the fire. And finally, it's listed as a noxious weed in California, but you can still buy it on the internet. So identifying the scope of the problem, I'm going to turn this over to Mike Anciaux now, and he's going to talk about the mapping that has been done.
Thanks, Bob. Let me change shares here and I'll go to my part of the presentation. So about a year and a half ago, I had a friend who, I wasn't involved in this at the time, but I had a friend who was, and he said, hey, Mike, we've got this problem. We've got this big weed growing all over the place, and we know there's a lot of it, but we don't know where it is. Can you help us? So I said, sure, I'd be happy to, because I've got some computer skills and some mapping skills. So I started looking into this, and basically it takes me out and into a creek and shows me this big bunch of massive grass here, 20, 30 feet tall, and says, that's Arundo. Get used to looking at it. We want you to find it all. And it's easy to spot, and there's lots of people who says, oh, I've got it here and here and here. But the problem of finding a little bit of it is easy, but finding all of it is hard, because as Bob was saying, we have a really big watershed. It's about 400 miles of creeks, and nobody knows what's in all 400 miles of creeks. So the question is, well, how do you figure out where it is? And ours is quite a bit different than in Southern California. Arundo invades like an entire river. So it might be 50 yards on either side of the river for miles at a time. But ours shows up in patches that might be 30 feet across or 10 feet across or 40 feet across, sort of relatively small patches. So we got to figure out how much there is and where it is. And that's what we started the problem with. And the first thing we did is we started using aerial imagery. So we used something like Google Maps, or in this case, Esri's ArcGIS maps. And if you zoom in enough, you can see that these are very distinctive looking plants. They've got long fronds, like we've talked about. It's a 30-foot piece of grass. And if you've got a really high-res image, and Google Earth tends to have this, as does the ArcGIS, you can see many of these and pick them out. So we said, wow, that's a great way to find it. And we started doing this. So we went through and basically flew over these creeks just by moving the map like this, and then said, oh, that looks like Arundo. We draw a polygon around it, and that's a patch. We found several hundred of things that look like Arundo, about 200 or 300 of those. So that was very helpful, and we found a lot of useful stuff. And also, if you zoom out in some of the areas, you can see there is no Arundo. In this particular area, it's saying this creek, you look in, there's really nothing there. It's just dead grass in the summer. So you can eliminate a lot of the areas of the creek that don't have Arundo. But there is a bit of a problem in that in some areas, you can't actually see the Arundo from the aerial view. So this area is Civic Park in Walnut Creek, and it doesn't look like, there's nothing obviously Arundo looking in here. But if you walked up close, you would find that this entire area here is all Arundo. That's maybe 50, 75 yards across. It's a very big patch of Arundo, but it's under trees. So you can't see it from the aerial imagery. So the question is, okay, we learned a lot. We got a bunch of patches that we found. What do we do with that information? Well, what we did is we recorded each of those patches, as I said, in ArcGIS, and then we needed to go ground truth those to figure out if indeed that what we were thinking was a patch, and to see if we could find anything else. And what we found is that we finished this effort last November. We found about 90% of the patches that we went to visit were indeed Arundo, so that's really good. We came up with quite a few. Unfortunately, we also found whenever we visited Arundo, we usually find maybe 30% more than we had anticipated. So there's a lot more out there that we hadn't found. And there's many creeks, many miles of creeks along here that are under trees that we haven't looked at all. So there's quite a bit more Arundo out there. And then out of all that was our ground truthing found 266 separate patches of Arundo, anything from a few square feet or 1 or 2 stalks to 25 or 30 yards. A lot of it's spread all over in the watershed, as you can see. Many of these creeks are very steep hillsides. Most of it, well over 2/3 of it, is on private property. So we're going to have to work with homeowners to figure out how to eradicate it. So we've pretty much sized the problem. We know how many patches there are, where they are, what kind of situations they're in. We have more work to do, but this is plenty of information to get started on getting rid of it. And as I said, we're using ArcGIS to keep track of it. So for each of these patches, this green one here, for example, not only do we know the size of it, but if we click on these, there's different information that we save on each of these. What's the species? What status is it? Have we verified it, that it exists? Have we treated it yet? Who is the creek group that's taking care of it? Information about who's verified the data, who's worked on the property, and then we also have information about who the owner contact is and whether it's okay for volunteers to work. So this is our single shared database of all the information about the patches throughout all of our creeks. And we try to keep this up to date with both new patches and patches we work on, so it'll be the record of what we're doing, what needs to be done next. And it not only works on the computer, we do this on our phones. This is a screenshot of a cell phone using ArcGIS's collector that gets the access to the same map, and they can work offline and basically walk these creeks, check out the Arundo and verify that, yeah, it is Arundo, what side of the creek is on, how steep is it, what's the access to it. And as they find new patches in the field, they can add these new patches. And as we treat them, they can, in the field, say, yep, we've treated this patch. Now, we expect to find quite a bit more out there. We have another map here that's in red. These creeks that you see in red are ones that we need to walk some more. We've basically broken up the creek into small segments of creek. And for every segment that we look at, or every segment, we say, this needs to be walked to really understand what's going on, or sometimes you can see from aerial, it only needs to be looked at in aerial. And wherever we've done less than we need to, it shows up in red. So we know exactly where we should be doing our work as we go monitoring and walking the rest of the creeks. And we'll have groups do this over the next year or two. Less urgent because we got plenty to work on, and we have a good number to tell people we have this stuff. We'd like to figure out a better way than walking the creeks to find this stuff. So it's possible, and we may investigate using some sort of 3D imagery, 3D infrared imagery, to figure out, does the heat signature of Arundo look different than other stuff? And can you just fly and look at aerials with different filters on it to find this Arundo in these hidden areas? And a project to be worked on at some place. But right now, we're planning on manually going down the creeks and then keeping track of what we're doing. And then finally, You can follow our progress. We've got a website at the Walnut Creek Watershed Council. Here's the URL for it. And this is the website over here. And the map is on it. So you all have access to this. If you want a bigger map, you click the button Bigger Map. It'll fill your screen with it. And you can zoom in it and change the base map. A lot of information that you can find exactly where the Arundo is and the creeks are and what our status on it is. So that's what I had to say. Bob, I'll let you get you back to where you were. This one? Yeah.
I hope so. Okay, thank you, Mike. The rest of it, we're going to be talking a little bit about what we're doing and showing some slides. When we realized the scope of the problem was some 260 some stands and probably more to be identified, we knew we needed to develop a methodology for how we're going to approach this. So we created and adopted a strategic plan for Arundo removal and replacement. The replacement is actually pretty important because once you remove it from an area and you're removing it because you want a more natural environment, one that is more suitable for the native plants and animals, you have to think about what you're going to be putting in there. But so this is only a small part of the strategic plan, and what it does, what this section does is really identify the 6 methods that we've decided upon for treatment. And we may, as we proceed, we will probably be identifying 1 or 2 more that we can use and might be more effective. But this is how we're starting, and each time we look at a stand, we think, well, which is the best method for this particular area. I wanted to show you a couple slides of actual work. This is a young man who is using a pair of loppers. The loppers are a little hard to see, but they're in his hands. And he's looking up at the Arundo. And the reason he's looking up at the Arundo is if you cut it a certain way, it's going to fall on you. And it's not that it's that heavy, it's that the leaves are very, very sharp. You can also use a saw. And if you have professional crews, you're more likely to use machetes or chainsaws that are more effective. But when you're dealing with volunteers, that's not what you want to be giving them necessarily. Once you've cut the Arundo, you've got to remove it because unless you take the stalk out of the area, the rhizomes and the nodes there will regenerate. And sometimes when you have a steep slope, you want to create the equivalent of a bucket brigade to move the Arundo out of the watershed because you don't want all of your volunteers traipsing down and traipsing back up carrying Arundo. You want to have as little impact on that stream side area as possible. Then when you get up to a flat area, you need to put it into a tarp. You can see that there's 4 people that are carrying, or there's probably a 5th one that we can't see, that are carrying this tarp because it is heavy and it's long. It actually is the entire length of that. And typically what we do is we carry it to a dumpster and then it's removed by the local agency. I wanted to show you a slide of the Root Wad. This is one of the 6 ways of removing it. You dig down and you try to remove all of the Root Wad that you can. It's not easy. So far we've only been able to do it on small stands. We can't do it on stands in steep slopes because of the erosion potential. And it's not easy work. This shows one of the other techniques where all of the techniques involve initially the cutting of the stalk. This involves applying glyphosate using a daubing technique. So some people are really concerned about a lot of people are actually, about the use of herbicides. And when you talk to them, particularly private landowner, one of the questions that comes up almost immediately is, well, you're not going to use herbicide, are you? And then we have to say, well, this is how we do it. And most of them are pretty okay with this very, very selective method that doesn't wind up in any spread of the herbicides. Some people have suggested solarization as a technique. I will just tell you, it doesn't work with black plastic. This is obviously a place where the stand was removed. In some areas, they covered it with black plastic. And you can see the Arundo doesn't seem to be greatly impacted by the presence of the black plastic. I wanted to show 2 sides. This is a area in the city of Lafayette, and immediately adjacent on the right side is a little tot lot. So that probably has some influence about how we do it. But it's not uncommon that when we see a stand of Arundo, which you can see in the background there, you will also, in the background here, you will also have ivy or other non-native and invasive species. And so this is a picture of this particular section of the creek before the removal, and this is what it looked like afterwards. And so if you had little kids there and you had running water, you could have them enjoy, at least looking at the creek. I mentioned earlier that when we created the Walnut Creek Watershed Council, we've been meeting since about 2011. We initially started as a group of about 5 or 6 people. And when you try to think about when you approach a problem like the Arundo and the Walnut Creek Watershed, you have to think about, first of all, finding and developing partners. With 9 cities and towns and the county, it was politically a bit complex because not all of them were engaged. We found 2 people, the Contra Costa County Flood Control Water Conservation District and the Resource Conservation District. I refer to them as people. We found 2 organizations. They have been extremely helpful, very supportive, and we are using the RCD really as our fiscal agent, and they provide a lot of the administrative support. We've also gone to environmental organizations for support of our organization, and specifically Land Trust and Friends of the Free Creeks committees. We're pleased that 2 committees, 2 Friends of the Creeks groups have been formed or revitalized since the Walnut Creek Watershed Council became in existence. We go to schools. We found high schools to be helpful because sometimes the kids will have hours that they have to contribute. And we found the same thing with the university where they have an environmental program, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then we've also had some benefit from some companies that are interested in this, and we need to work on that part. I have 2 slides where I show how the partners can help. This was a project to remove 4 stands of Arundo in an area near a local high school. These are all students from the Diablo Valley College who were getting credit for coming out on the day and who are in a program, a horticultural program, that makes them naturally interested in this type of activity. And then this is showing one of our other partners, the Resource Conservation District, some of the work that they do. So, this is in the front, but it's also sort of behind the scenes. This is not directly removing Arundo or planting new plants. This is the process of informing people about what's involved and what's required and trying to get them engaged. So I talked about developing partners. Finding sponsors is another major component of trying to organize to get this work done. We've had corporate contributions in terms of time and money. Most of the money has been as a result of a mitigation requirement by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. We've had municipal corporations do the same with varied success. Some seem to be very supportive and some seem to have virtually no interest. Our principal source of funds to date has been mitigation funds, and we're concerned that as you look out over time in a community or an area like the Central Contra Costa County that is already pretty heavily developed, there may not be a significant flow of mitigation funds going forward. We haven't gone to membership or sponsorship fees, but we may have to look at that someday. We have not, we are a voluntary, non-regulatory stakeholder group. So we have not created ourselves as a 501c3, but it's something that we probably will need to look at depending upon how much work we wind up trying to do. And we don't have an executive director, but if it is one of those things that when you get to the stage that you want to do some serious fundraising or you want to maintain an annual program of a significant amount over time, that's one of the decisions that we'll have to make. We spend a little time in our organization trying to inform and engage the public. When some people from the San Ramon Creek came to us in 2017 and said, would you be interested in helping us on the summer Arundo problem? We said yes. We spent probably the better part of the next year going through the process of trying to figure out how we were going to do that. And one of the things we did was we held an evening session called Creek Invaders, You can see the reference to that Diablo Valley College down below. That is where this was held. The two pictures on the bottom part of the screen show the meeting room, and we had probably about 150 people. On the upper left, one of our local friends groups has done a table and is talking about the work that her Creek group does. And on the upper right, when we started looking at how do we do ground truthing, we thought, well, it'd be a whole lot easier if we could just fly drones. And so we had a drone exhibit because we thought it also would be interesting to people. But we learned very quickly that the drone itself has to be within the visual sight of the operator, and they don't really do well flying under trees. But this was a highly successful event where we got people engaged and interested in creek removal. And I'll have another slide a little bit later about this. So this is one of our other things we have done is we tried to learn from other people. Napa County has had a Arundo removal program for some time, and they presented here. And we also went up to Arundo, went up to Napa to see what they were doing. As an organization that wants to tell people, but also wants to bring people involved and engaged, we found it necessary to do an annual report. And our report for 2018, which is online, available online, has on the front cover a picture of Arundo. It actually makes it look pretty attractive, and we had a fair number of arguments about whether we should use it or not. But we found our report focuses on Arundo. It includes reports from each of the cities and the county about the actions that they are doing, as well as reports from the friends groups. So reports on a lot of different things, but we found that this is really an important tool for bringing people together around one thing. Oh shucks, this got sideways, so you're gonna have to turn your head. We decided we had to develop our own materials. There's a very good brochure on Arundo that was done by the Sonoma Ecology Center in 2008. The problems that we had with it was that we couldn't get sort of like the master copy so we could duplicate it. So we decided we really needed to develop our own brochure so that we could produce as many copies as we needed of what quality we wanted. We took some of the material from the Sonoma Ecology publication, but we produced this, and I apologize for it being sideways. It wasn't the last time. But one of the things that we did here was all of the pictures but one is of Arundo in the Walnut Creek watershed. So we made it a local document. The one that is not is a screenshot taken from a TV news program dealing with a fire in San Diego that you can readily see the Arundo leaves in it. We've made good use of, or some use of, local media. It's a good way to get your story out, to let people know what you're doing and why you're doing it. This is the local executive director of the Resource Conservation District, together with the interviewer and the camera. This may sound strange as a title for a slide, but some time ago I was sort of complaining a little bit to a friend in a local land trust about how you schedule this event and 10 people show up, you schedule another event, maybe 15 or 5, and you think you should be getting more people out. And he says, no, what you really need to do is you need to, don't give up hope, keep doing it, and you hope you find that one crazy person who will just take over. In this particular one, this is at the Diablo Valley College. We were setting it up with some kids who were being given credit to show up and be there, and it was part of the horticultural program. And this fine man, Dick Aaron, just said, well, they need to see some Arundo. They need to be able to touch it, to feel it, to grasp it, not just see pictures of it. So he went out that morning and he cut the Arundo, and this is him bringing it in. And I think it added to the thing, but we wouldn't have done it but for his efforts. So there's still some questions remaining because we can easily address the Arundo that's on public land, and most of the Arundo in Civic Park is. But how do we get landowners, private landowners involved? Because my guess is probably 90% of the Arundo is on private land. And the second, we'll have one more slide on that a little bit later. And how do we get local government engaged? And this is actually the biggest one. And I'm going to do it from we get some time time and money from some, but most of them we don't. And some have no interest at all. And that's one issue. The second issue, I think, is, and this is from a zoning perspective, cities and counties regulate actively, heavily, the size of the building, the setback from the street, the height of your fences, and several other things. There's virtually no regulation of what you can do with a creek that's in your backyard. And I think going forward over time, we need to start to have that discussion. The last question really is more of a silly question at this stage, because what after the Arundo is gone? I think we got a 5-year effort here, 6-year effort. There's going to be a Arundo left after that 6-year effort, so it's a ways away. But you wonder if you create a large organization that right now is focused on Arundo, even though there's a lot of other issues in the watershed. What is it that you are going to do? What are you going to focus on as you get further down the road? And it's just something we just need to have in the back of our mind. And I mentioned private landowners, and I've got 2 more slides after this. This is a meeting that we just scheduled on June 10th, Monday. We're focusing on Pine Creek. Pine Creek is about 3/4 of a mile in length, 27 private landowners, 25 stands of Arundo. And we don't know how this is going to work, but when we look at the other large creek sections where the stands are much more separated and many more private landowners, we decided to try this first to see what the issues are, what the problems are, and we'll see where it goes from there. And then I think I have one more slide. Yes. Have fun with your partners. This is something that's actually really important. There's only the 2 people in shirts and the orange vests are actually working, so they may not be thinking this is a lot of fun. The 5 guys and there's a person taking the picture are there because they think this is fun. What we did here, this is San Ramon bypass. It was constructed to avoid high flood waters in Walnut Creek Civic Park, and it does that. It's designed really well for high flows, but it's not designed for low flows. So this directs the low flows into Civic Park, the natural channel, and it helps the wildlife there. It helps the environment and keeps the water temperature cooler. But the fundamental notion, and I apologize for all that lengthy explanation, is just, when you're creating an organization like this, you also have to make sure that you have a little fun once in a while. So Dave and Sarah, I think that concludes our presentation. And if there are any questions, we'll be glad to try to answer them.
Well, thank you so much, Bob and Mike. That is truly inspiring. I remember when I first heard about this effort, and I was struck by the amount of community infrastructure you had put together. And it's evident from your presentations, the meetings, the annual report, the fundraising, the pulling together of coalition of agencies and friends groups, even getting out there with the media. It's apparent you're having fun. This is definitely a rewarding activity. So yeah, I would encourage anybody listening to put any questions you have into the chat function, and we can relay them to Bob and Mike. There is one in here about what types of riparian plants are good for planting after Arundo has been removed.
So I don't know that either Mike or either wants to answer that question, but but we have somebody who is the president of an organization called the Restoration Trust, and he is helping us design what plants should go in. He likes, by the way, I know Santa Barbara sedge because I've heard him mention that a lot, but a lot depends on where you are in terms of the height away from the water level. And sometimes actually you're above the bank, in which case you might be looking at trees. If you have, some of our creeks have 50-foot sidewalls from the bottom of the stream to up the top. So what you do will vary. But we appreciate the question. This is why we call it the Arundo removal and replacement team that we have. But we haven't really taken that step as far as we would like to in terms of identifying the plants and figuring out how we're going to actually replant some of these sites.
fair enough. Well, it obviously is kind of a community learning project as well, which is something that's inspiring, that you're diving in and figuring things out as you go. One of the resources it sounded like you had is the horticulture department at DVC, Diablo Valley College, the local community college there. What kind of involvement have they had to date, and what kind of involvement do you potentially envision them having in the future?
They've been very supportive. In fact, we had our conference there, and that's a good way to sort of build those relationships, and that's part of what you do. Developing partners is also building relationships. Going forward, I would probably say there's not, well, and I should add, the students from that program have come out and helped, and that means going forward that they're engaged, and if we keep that level of activity up, that's a real positive. I think the second step, to answer your second question, is I'm not sure there's a top side limit to that other than capacity. We'd love it. There's a lot of other issues besides Arundo and the watershed, and we would hope at some stage, I would hope at some stage we'd get some people going after masters or whatever, coming to take who need, or a PhD, who need to do a thesis, come and take a look at this watershed because of its complexity, because of its uniqueness, and help us study some of this, because what we don't have, Mike has put a lot of data into the mapping. We don't have a lot of data outside of Arundo, and there's a lot going on in the watershed.
Gotcha. Yeah, the Hort department came to mind because of that question about native riparian plants for revegetation. So I'm sure there's a lot more that will be learned on that topic as you go forward. There have been a few questions that have come in. First is, did you formalize the partnership in this endeavor by creating a weed management area, WMA, and have you received any funding from the state as a result of that? The State Department of Food and Agriculture provides some funding to county-based WMAs.
The short answer is no to both questions, but we're writing down the fact of the weed management agency. We were also, because of the fire risk, we were also told that to contact, I think it's the Diablo Valley Fire Safety Council, and we had not, we just learned that today. And as you might know in other things, Doug, you learn things over time as you become more familiar with stuff. So we picked up a couple things today that we'll follow up on, including the weed management. So we thank you for that.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, your timing starting in 2011 was just as the funding for weed management areas was lost, and it's just coming back now. So hopefully there will be, and I think the Contra Costa RCD is certainly aware of the weed management area developments. And so that's probably a good source for funding for your work. Another question, in response to how to get homeowners involved, this person is thinking that municipalities that are giving fire safety preventions can mention the threat that Arundo poses to defensible space. Is that, has that been considered? Is that part of the fire safety education?
It hasn't been to date, but as I said earlier, we just learned about the fire. We just learned about the possibility that the Fire Safety Council would give grants, and so we will be talking with them and working with them. Arundo presents a number of problems, and so far we've been working mostly on, like with the Fish and Wildlife and the Regional Water Quality Control Board. But it's clear we need to sort of expand some of the entities and a little bit of how we look at the issues that Arundo presents.
Well, and it sounds like you're working to integrate the private landowners into willing partners, and I'm sure this is one of the angles that would get people's attention. Another question, how can a person provide location information for Arundo stands to your, I'm assuming this is somebody in your area. Mike, is that one you want to take?
Yeah, they could send the information to me. My email is on this presentation. the other way to do it is to look at the map on the website that the link is here on the presentation, and zoom in and see if it's already there, because it might be. And that would also have contact information as to how to send more. And if you're highly involved in this and you want to get involved and walk around the creeks and look at it, we give you access to actually go edit it and put it in yourself.
Well, that sounds fun. And again, the URL of the website?
www.ccrcd/arrt.html.
Which stands for Contra Costa RCD, and then what's
Arundo,
the ART?
Arundo Removal and Replacement Team.
So ARRT, gotcha, okay. Another question here, Phragmites is a species that's similar to Arundo. Are you seeing any Phragmites in the Walnut Creek watershed?
I don't know.
We don't know.
No, we don't know.
All right.
We'll look for it.
Okay.
Is it as invasive?
It's an invasive species. It's a similar growth form. So yeah, you can certainly find information on Calypsy's website. And speaking of that, I will add to your answer to the last question about providing location information on Arundo stands. If you're not in the Walnut Creek watershed, there is a large, Calypsy has undertaken collection of a lot of data across the state on Arundo and uploaded that to the CalFlora, calflora.org online database. And that's a great place as well. If you zoom into an area and you see that a population you're aware of isn't already on there, you can just drop a point onto that map as well. So certainly we're looking for.
Let me follow up on that. We've uploaded all our data also into the Calypsy CalFlora website. So if you're recording it there, just tell us so we keep it in sync. So if you're putting it a Arundo thing into Calypsy, and we won't get it from there unless you tell us, but you'll find all our stuff there.
Good to know. Cynthia Powell is saying that the link didn't seem to quite work, and so there may be something that's missing. One thing that would be helpful is if you could type it into the chat.
Yeah.
And then
here,
people will see it, because it might be www or who knows.
Oh, you're right. Here, let me. How do I get to?
Somebody did ask a question about the kind of the status of Arundo outside of the Walnut Creek watershed, and it's all over the state, really. If you take a look at calflora.org or Cal Weed Mapper, both show the distribution of Arundo across the state. And it's a riparian weed, so it occurs around water, and it's really severe in Southern California coastal watersheds. There's currently a multi-million-dollar project going on in the Salinas River, which flows out in Monterey, of course, but flows northward for, I don't know, some 50 miles or something. And it has quite a Arundo infestation. And in a case like that, the project, project that large is funded by the state. It requires all sorts of permitting. It's implemented from the top of the watershed down, because as Mike and Bob indicated, fragments of the plant can start new plants. And so if you start downstream and start working upstream, you're going to have pieces of plants coming down and reinfesting the areas you've cleared. So that's one of the major projects, and that's why it's really inspiring to see a project like this, where the infestation is not so huge. It's patchy, but it will get huge if it's not taken care of. And so having the attention to detail that this effort has is what it's going to take to catch that problem before it gets bigger. Well, I think we are close to the end of our time here. While you're thinking of any final questions and putting those into the chat, Sarah, do you have the poll to post
I do.
Excellent.
I will launch it right now.
So these are a few questions. UC Cooperative Extension and Cal IPSI first did this lunchtime webinar last year, and we really enjoyed it and got good feedback. And so we're doing it again this year, and hopefully we keep doing it. But these are just, I think there are 3 quick questions to gauge how useful it was and where your level of awareness was to start. We certainly would be pleased to have any feedback you have for us on things that would improve the series. My email address I will type into the message box just so that's handy. Oops, send to everyone. And Sabrina Drill, who was instrumental in putting this series together and has helped host the first 3 of these, is busy in meetings at UC Davis today, but will be back with us again tomorrow when we have another Bay Area watershed-based effort working on knotweeds, which are another major riparian weed. They are one of the world's worst weeds. You'll find them in lists of top 100 invasive species. They're a huge problem up in Washington and Oregon. Within a moisture climate, we're somewhat protected by our drier climate here, but we do have some, and it's spreading. And so there's a fascinating project happening in Marin and Sonoma County to address their knotweed. I see that Bob and Mike have put in the link. So ccrcd.org/ARRT. Yep. Last comment here, I see, doesn't Cal IPSI and or the Contra Costa RCD have plant lists that would be good use after Arundo removal, fast growing? Well, the Contra Costa RCD may, and Cal IPSI focuses mostly on the weeds and removing them. We have safe landscaping alternatives, but those are typically for landscaping use, not necessarily for restoration. So certainly the Native Plant Society with some of their local nurseries, like up in East Bay Regional Parks, grow out local stock. Some of our commercial nurseries, like the Watershed Nursery, grow out commercial stock either of general plants that they've collected, or if you have a specific project where you want them to revegetate with local stock to that site, they will collect seed, grow out plants, and then you have those to replace as well. So there definitely are resources out there.
And when I answered that question, Doug, I was answering it from the standpoint of whether I knew the information, not whether there was information there that is available to people to determine what to plant that would be native to their area. And you just gave an excellent discussion about, one of the entities is willing to probably collect seed, which is really important as part of that process.
Excellent. Cynthia, you may have seen Cynthia's chat entry to everyone, but the CalFlora has a suggestion of 81 species for planting in Walnut Creek riparian areas based on soil, climate, and species. So that's an excellent resource right there. Thanks for sending that, Cynthia.
There's some interesting challenges when you're doing it in these patches like this, in that there's no irrigation there. So somehow you have to figure out how you're going to get these plants to live through the first year. And if you're right at the water level, willows work really well. You can cut a branch off and just pound it into the ground. That's, they'll grow right away. But when you get up out of the water zone, now you've got this disturbed soil that's very dry. You may end up having to find some way to get water to it. So that may be one of the biggest constraints of which plants will work for you and which don't. That's
a great point. Well, it sounds like addressing your final point about what do we do if we actually get rid of the Arundo, it sounds like there are other weeds and plenty of restoration needs and habitat improvement needs to keep you busy for the long term. So thanks for the great work you both and your coalition have done, and thanks for taking the time out to prepare and present today. Sarah and I will keep this webinar open for a few more minutes in case you are answering the poll. But let's end it for today. Thank our speakers. Thank all of you for attending. Certainly let any of your friends and colleagues that you think might be interested know that we have one more left tomorrow. And we'll hope to see you then. Take care.